Good day. I'm very pleased of the invitation to come and have my speech here. I'm familiar with the work of you and especially Dr. Fuchs. That has been very near of my interest of embodiment and dialogue in the lately. But I've been listening and enjoyed all the presentation here, and it also made me change a bit of the topic that I thought to speak, and I thought that it would be good to have some background of this dialogical and relational perspective of life, and especially because it's so much related in my practice and research in treatment of most severe crises. So that's what I'm going to speak of, the relational and dialogical idea of life, and a bit focusing on what would it mean in thinking of psychotic problems and the treatment of them. So I'm not so much speaking of the embodiment, even if that's a topic that I'm mostly involved at the moment. When we speak of dialogue and dialogical way of life, I think that we cannot fully understand the power of dialogue without not referring to the Russian philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin. And Mikhail Bakhtin was the one who opened the doors for humankind to understand the power of dialogue. And for Bakhtin, it's very important to realize that dialogue is not mainly communication, but it's a much more profound idea for us humans to become formed as a human being in relation with each other. And as said here, Bakhtin says that in a dialogue, a person participates wholly and throughout his whole life with his eyes, lips, hands, soul, spirit, with his whole body and deeds. And for me, there are two extremely important elements what he said. First, he said that we participate in dialogue from the very first inhaling in our life. And of course, we nowadays have a lot of research on the discipline of intersubjectivity that really has shown the idea that from the very first day of life, a human being is an active initiative taker in dialogical relationships and not waiting for the first half a year becoming a kind of psychological being. And the second part he says here is that we participate in dialogue not mainly by speaking, but with our whole body and all deeds that we do. So it's a very practical cooperation. And actually it's a very, very fascinating idea for me, based very much of my understanding of all the topics that I'm doing in the research and the clinical practice. There are two prerequisites of life. First, we have to learn to breathe when we come to the world. And secondly, we learn to be in dialogue. And these are the two things that pair our lives, and nothing else is needed. If we do not breathe, we die. If we are not in dialogue, we die. So Mikhail Bakhtin said that outside dialogue is the death. There is nothing else. And some words of psychosis and psychiatry, only shortly referring to the idea that within psychiatry there is a big change taking place at the moment. And this is very fortunate after a very unfortunate 20 years of period of time within psychiatry. In psychiatry, we have been looking for a kind of extreme reductionistic neurobiological movement during the last 20 years. In this movement, there was an aim try to put the mental functioning locating in some parts of the brain, and actually it has led into not so good outcomes, and especially the research of Nancy Andreasen that showed that actually what happens in a brain of schizophrenia patient is that the medication, use of medication seems to be related to the shrinkage of brain. And this notion really has opened the door during the last 2 or 3 years to more psychosocial interventions in psychosis. And there are some other important notions, for instance the Dutch study by Wundering and others who showed that actually first-time psychotic patients who did not get medication in the beginning had a much better, significantly better social outcome compared to the medicated patient. And only a year ago, Science journal published a paper in which they refer to 10 studies, one of them being the open dialogue study, saying that talking cure is back in psychosis. And it's of course a very fortunate thing to do. But of course the one unfortunate part of this is that psychotherapists stopped to have interest of psychosis during the last 20 years. Family therapists stopped to have interest of helping psychotic families, but now it's coming back, and of course I'm very, very glad about that. If we think of psychosis, and this is related of the dialogical point of view that I think I have three hypotheses that actually have more or less guided my work in this field for 30 years. First of all, psychosis does not exist. There is not a kind of category that we could say that people who have psychotic problems, they would be qualitatively different compared to people who do not have psychotic problems. There are no studies that could have shown that there should be some kind of categorical differences. Psychotic symptoms are not so much symptoms of an illness, but they are more a kind of strategy of our embodied mind to survive in a very strange experiences. And if we think of long-standing psychotic problems, they are not signs so much of the heavy illness that this person is suffering, but they are more a sign of failure in treatment. And the failure in treatment comes out of at least 2 points. First of all, our system is organized in a way that people do not have help immediately when they would need, and which means that they have a long time to develop a very peculiar psychological strategy to live with their own experiences that we call for it as hallucinations. And secondly, failure in the treatment becomes evident if we have a non-adequate understanding of human life. It gives reason to build up a system that does not respond to the needs of the clients. And that's what we have been seeing during the last 20 years, only thinking that what is needed is medication and perhaps help with some other things. For me, psychotic behavior is a response to something, extreme situation that people are living. It's a kind of dealing with experiences, stressful experiences in one's life that do not yet have words. And many times, quite fascinating when people are having hallucination or delusion, and in the very first meeting that we meet with them, it's non-understandable. But for a while, after we meet several times, we actually start to understand that people are speaking of real incidents in their lives. In hallucinations, people speak of things that has happened in their life, and it may be that for the first time ever, they have access to form words in those experiences that are in their body, in the memory of their bodies, in a kind of metaphorical way to reach that. And of course this is very important notions, because the thing to say to people finding words is not to say that this is your illness and this is the reality, but actually encourage to tell more of those kind of experiences with a very genuine interest of it. Okay, the second point that I want to say some words is of speaking of this relational mind. So, and this is very much related of the dialogical point of view that Michael Pahten was speaking about. When we come to work, when we come to life, we fall into relationships. And those relationships, those relational experiences come to be our psychological structure. From the very first one, we have several experiences, and they are very comprehensive bodily experiences with the smell, with the sound, with the touch of the mother or father, and more people being there. And in those touching and movements, the others becomes a part of my affect regulation, and this is of course the starting point of intersubjectivity. When new baby is moving by her movement, he have an affect regulation, regulating of her affective arousal, and at the same time they are communicated acts. So that's a kind of starting point for this intersubjective reality. And from the very first on, there are more voices. We live in a polyphony of the voices, and these voices in my mind are the experiences of the relationships that we have from the very first on in our lives. And meaning of life is to have dialogue between the voices that I have inside of me, if there is something that I can call is inside of me, and the voices that are there for the others. I will not go into detail of speaking so much of the intersubjectivity, but only to refer of some important persons. For me, the most important person in this field is a Scottish professor, Colvin Trevarthen, who already since 60s started to do research of the communication between newborn baby and grown-up. And his point of view is to focus on this musical and rhythmic quality of the human interaction. And it's a very embodied rhythmicity. He calls a jazz-like rhythmicity that guides the human people attunement and synchrony with each other. Mihail Bachtin was saying that the same, actually he already at the 20s spoke also of intersubjectivity, and he was saying that I never can be familiar with myself only by myself. I need your eyes to see myself. I see myself in your eyes, or I borrow your eyes to see myself. And if we think what happens, it happens that I have a sense of myself in the response that I have in your eyes. And this response is a kind of non-mediated response. It don't go through the words, through the language, but it happens in milliseconds. And in that way, we all the time are in a way a kind of dance with each other in which we respond to each other, and my response is the initiative to respond to the other one. And we all the time synchronize our behavior with others. And of course, people doing research of mirror neurons partly have verified this in a very concrete studies happening in a neuron level. Fascinating thinking of psychology is that this way of understanding of human life was open to us 100 years ago when American psychologist William James was speaking of this type of reality, when he spoke that life is a stream, all the time ongoing stream of initiative and responses, and we do not so much observe or have a feeling or emotions, but we sense similarities, and he says that they are experiences, are feelings that are often so acute that we are unable to name them at all. This is the point. In a psychotherapy field, we have been very much occupied of emotions. In English word emotions. Actually, I don't know what would be the word in German language. I know that you have Gefühl and others. But when we speak of emotions, we actually speak of thoughts. Because emotions are thought to be something that I can say that I felt so bad when you said such bad things of me. And that is of course some feeling that I may have, but I have formulated that into the emotions. And usually we think of psychotherapy being a business in which we give meanings of those kind of formulations that we do in language. But what William James is speaking about, and what we are aiming in dialogical practice, is to take a step backwards and to have the feelings or the sensing of something that happens in my body. I can be speaking, and all of a sudden I can't breathe. I may have tears in my eyes without knowing any words what is it. And in a dialogical practice, we respond to this kind of utterances in a way, accepting those, becoming a part of our meeting without the necessity or without the need to put everything that we experience into words. And in that way, it's of course very embodied action. In a concrete way, I've tried to put that into very naive, quite naive picture, but only shortly say that we are all the time living in two frames of different voices. We are living in the voices of between clients, and therapist. Mikko was a man who tried to commit a suicide, and he came to therapy with his family, and he met with two or actually three therapists. And this is the polyphony of life in a horizontal way, because in this conversation things that we meet get a meaning. But at the same time there is a much richer part of the polyphony with all the voices and experiences that Mikko has about his own life with him. He was working in a technician in a factory, and he got ill, somatic ill, was on disability for 1 year, and being way back he realized that actually his employer don't want him back to the work. A lot of the voices related with the work was that we discussed. A lot of the voices, what kind of father he has been for his children, and a lot of the voices, what kind of son he has been for his parents, because he said that in his family, father was the one who was excluded from the family context, and this became a very big problem to Mikko, and he started to make new, reconnect to his father, and actually you can say that he fell in love with his father again. And, but father was ill, and he died in the middle of this process. So the voices of the death of the father were there. And if we think ourselves as a therapist, when we come into work in a way that the idea how do we respond to each other is the most important idea, we live in our voices the same kind of ideas. When we speak of what kind of father he has been for his children, the voices in my life, which kind of father I have been for my children are there. When he speaks of his relationship to his parents, the voices in my life, what was my relationship to my parents, to my father, and even more intimate when he speaks of the death of the father, there were voices in my life. How was my relationship when he passed away? Are there? Not in a way that I start to speak of them, but in the way how do we are in the dance, how open I am to receive emotional issues, and the richness comes out of that we are always more than one therapist, and my colleague lives these stories in her voices that are definitely always different compared to the one that I'm experiencing there. And in all meetings, we actually live two meetings at the same time. We live the meetings of the stories that people tell of their lives, the narratives that they think. These are always from past, something that already has happened. But at the same time, we live the stories in our bodies, in our bodily presence here and now. And in what way do we respond to the stories being there that happen? Mikhail Bakhtin used to say that for a human being, nothing is more terrible than a lack of response. So, in a dialogical way of working, actually the only thing that we think that we are doing there in the meetings is to guarantee that people become heard and have a response and are recognized in the ways that they are doing. And thinking of psychotic stories, I think that this embodiment becomes even more accurate idea compared to many other type of mental health problems in a way, because there is so many things that are not put into words, which means that the experiences, feelings, that the one who is psychotic is having start to live in my part of, in my experiences. And how do we deal with those are very important part of the dialogical meetings. Our way that I was involved first as working as a clinical psychologist in northern Finland since 1980 till 1998, and we created a new type of system of treatment, and it was originated in 1984, in which when we started to organize open meetings. Instead of having professionals meeting and making a treatment plan for the clients who have been hospitalized, we started to have open meetings in a way that whoever was hospitalized, he or she was invited in the meeting from the very same door opening, then the professional started to speak of the problem. And this was of course the idea of the openness. And at the same time we came up to the idea that families should be invited into family therapy talks if we think that there is some problems, indication for family therapy, with an idea that every time a contact has been made into some professionals, family should be invited. Some family should have a place to come into the open talk. And by so doing, we realized that families were very eager to say what they want to do, what they want to have. And again, this led us into a pretty confusing experiences that we did not understand what this is all about. And perhaps the big problem was that we were so focused on the idea that as a therapist we need to have control of the problems by our intervention and methods that we use. But when there were several participants, the one who is hospitalized, the family members, everyone has his or her point of view, and actually it's impossible to have a control and define, and this is the way we have to go. And step by step we came into realize that the idea of these meetings are actually not so much to find solutions or plans, but to be there. And to be there is the thing that happens, and learn the idea to be in a way that every voice is becoming heard. Sometimes after we reorganized the system, because we realized that in the traditional system there is no place for family meetings, and it was reorganized to make crisis intervention services possible for the entire area in Lapland. And 20 years ago we made a research in which we analyzed the new system and realized that there seems to be 7 main ideas, guiding ideas of an optimal treatment. And in a crisis, in a severe crisis, in a psychotic crisis, but not only in psychotic crisis, because it's an idea for any kind of crisis situation. First of all, that the optimal response guarantees meeting with people immediately within 24 hours after the contact, to have acute or home resolution schemes that makes it possible. Secondly, always include the family and the rest of the social network as a part of our intervention. And third point, being flexible, meaning that we always integrate the different methods of treatment fitting to the unique and specific needs of every client and his or her family. Fourth point was that to guarantee the responsibility in a way that whoever is contacted in this area becomes responsible for organizing the meeting for the family and for the clients, and at the same time working in a way that we guarantee the psychological continuity by going across of the boundaries of the treatment system, so that the inpatient and outpatient team can work together. The people from the social care could be invited to work together with the people in child psychiatry and so on. And then the last point is that by so doing, the idea is not mainly to come together and find a solution, remove the symptoms, change the family, but it's more to create a kind of system that tolerates uncertainty, that there are no ready-made responses. And in this respect, what is most important is the idea of dialogue. We are here for generating new words and new language for experiences that did not yet have words or language. And actually this is was when I got an education as a family therapist early 80s. Step by step coming into the dialogical way of working, it's a really different way of doing than we were used to doing in the beginning. Because in the beginning we were thinking that the family is the one we try to have a change, for instance, by having some methods, interventions or reframings of the behavior. And step by step coming into the idea that the only thing to do in the meetings is to start to have try a kind of meaning and an understanding, and in order to have understanding I really have to be open to listen all the utterances and all the voices of every participant. And when we are many, the voices can be very contradictory. the thing that the young man is thinking when he is suspected using drugs is very different compared to how his parents, mother and father, are thinking about the issue. And the challenge for us is, of course, to have a kind of meeting in which his voice becomes taken seriously and heard at the same time as the concern of the mother and father. The openness of this idea is very important because we try to do it in a way that not make a preparation in advance, but to guarantee that everything starts openly so that we come together through the same door opening and start to discuss. I will not go so much into detail because of the short time of my presentation. But in the end, I thought to share one example of the studies that we have done of this system, because the results are very different compared to that we are used to in psychiatry. We followed a 5 years period of time, 2 samples of people who came into the treatment at the 90s, first because being first-time psychotic, between 92 to 97. And what came up, not going into the detail of the study, was that because, first of all, one of the questions to us was in the beginning that what is the role of psychosis medication? And we were a part of Finnish national study in which there was made a comparison of units who used medication in the traditional way and the units who postponed the start of psychosis medication, and it was only used if needed. And as a surprise, during the 5 years period of time, only 1/3 of the patient needed psychosis medication. Actually, only 20% in the very beginning, later on was it. And 81% did not have any remaining psychotic symptoms, and 81% had returned to full employment. This is really different compared to how we are used to think in psychiatry. And we can see the difference here. If compared to one study that was run in Stockholm in a traditional system, at the same time, we could see that the people were hospitalized 4 times more compared to Lapland, and the retirement disability allowance rate was 62 compared to 90. So it really is a very different kind of understanding of psychotic problems. And we were criticized of these results, and because of people, for instance, claimed that we have made a trick. We have excluded the most serious patients, and for that reason and for our own interest, we made a replica of the same research 10 years after, and now followed 2 years' time, first-time psychotic patients, and actually realized that the outcomes were very same. 84% of these people had returned to full employment. It's not a sheltered employment, but full employment. They are in the studies, in their work, but the surprise, what we realize also, is that in this small area in Finland, there has been a very dramatic decline of schizophrenia, incidence of schizophrenia. When there were 33 new schizophrenia patients per 100,000 inhabitants in the middle of 80s when we started this project, in 20 years it had declined to 1/10. There was 2 new schizophrenia patients per 100,000 inhabitants, 2003 to 2005. One thing may be related to this is that the duration of untreated psychosis had declined in the area where this is systematic crisis intervention into 3 weeks, because there is a lot of studies showing that people may be psychotic between 1 to 3 years before they come into the treatment. Now, of course, this is all too late to start. But if there is a systematic community-based system, professionals know which team to contact, how to help people to have early enough support, and if this is done, things do not have time to develop as severe as schizophrenia is. Okay, the very last point is to sum up, to to try to answer the questions, why are these results so different compared to many other places, actually any other places that I know in the world. First of all, I think that what is the importance is the importance of having immediate help, having the crisis orientation in which people are met immediately, which means that they are met in their emotionally loading situation, in which they do not have so much words to describe and narratives, but they live in their bodies, the anxiety, the distress, and all the ideas. And this is a very fruitful point of time coming together and start to discuss what has happened. But this is not enough. The second point is that we really need the family and other part of the social network be there from the very beginning as long time as needed. So it's not an idea toward one patient, but it's an idea to have all the relational context to coming together and live so long time as possible. And the third point is the idea of dialogue, because in the meeting the main idea no longer is to have some treatment intervention or some therapeutic interpretation or meaning, but the main idea is that we are here and start to listen and start to recognize and start to accept the other without conditions. And this is a very different way how we used to think of psychotherapeutics meeting. In a way, it's a shift from therapist-driven practice into a client-driven practice, because we all the time open the meetings by asking, how would you like to use the time? What would you like to discuss? And we start to discuss of the things that our clients are speaking, and the professional duties that we know that need to be discussed is discussed in the end of the meeting and not in the beginning of the meeting. And the fourth point is that because in a new crisis there is so much avoided use of psychotic medication, we can prevent the harmful effect of the medication, and it really supports the active empowerment of clients together with their families to be. Okay, I will not go into detail, but really lately this working in this dialogical manner for decades nowadays has led us more and more to become interested of embodied quality of this relational context, and this is a research that we are running nowadays in which we try to look at how do we respond to each other in our bodies, how do we synchronize our bodies and experiences, how do we attune to each other in the conversation. And we look also, we measure the autonomic nervous system reactions of the therapist and the client in the therapy session, and already now have realized that actually this kind of synchronization in our bodies happens. This is actually quite fascinating notion that we have done. Our bodies speak to each other in the meeting, not only the words that we produce in our mouth. When we think of all this, so this is a very big shift into focusing on methods and intervention in our practice, and I think that in this dialogical manner what becomes relevant is the kind of basic values of human life. And of course I do not know any more basic value than love. Love is the connection between people, and what we so many times have realized and what the families say in their interviews is that these connections within the families that has been interrupted because of the crisis or some other things that had happened before the crisis in the families can be reunited, and the love that is submitted in those relationships, it's a very curing element of life.